So Jenny, I think there is a common misperception that somehow investment financing are just for these sort of like big, big box office films. And actually, we have a slide, right, that some of the ones Oscar-winning films like Icarus and many others here. But I wonder if you, how
Yeah,
do
I
you
mean,
feel?
so Impact Partners has been around for about 12 years and have invested in more than 100 films over that period of time. And we have done a number of films that are considered more commercial and did recoup the investors.
Here, let's roll through some of them, actually. We have them while you're sharing it, yeah.
And then, and this is we're on to the next slide now, right? Yeah, I can't really
Yeah.
see. But we've also invested in a whole range of films in terms of what the budget of the film is, what genre it is, how directly social impact it is versus maybe more of a cultural conversation starter. And some of those projects led to profit for the investors, and others they took a loss on. And the mission at Impact Partners is very much a balance between making great films that will engage people in pressing social issues and conversations around those issues, but also ideally have the opportunity to recoup on average over the course of the slate of films in a given year, at least get close to recouping that money and keep it into the space of supporting documentary films. And so, every film is different, and every film, the need for equity investment. I think we're using that term today, not equity.
Investment,
yes.
yeah. We can explain why soon. Yeah.
Yes, and the amount of investment that a particular film can hold it really varies greatly from film to film, and you can see a huge range here just in the films that we've supported.
Yeah, so I think our goal is to also demystify investing, right? That's where a lot of the money is moving in the space, or there's more money in investment. So you have many fellow brethren and sisters who are using investment financing. So don't be afraid. But so then I'll turn to the filmmakers, Josh and or Yael. I would love to hear from both of you about how you think about when a film is appropriate for an investment versus grants only, and what are some of the factors you're considering in that calculation?
Sure. So I don't, I would say 95% of the movies I work on, I would say I'm open to a mix of grants, investments, and it's more about meeting the funder at what they need and what makes, like, a funder is writing you a check for one way or another, what for probably most people in this room is a large amount of money. If you're thinking about your wallet and it's a risky thing, you don't know what's going to happen with the film, what kind of success there's going to be, financial, marketplace, and if I sort of want to give the the funder back what they want on that, and try to be open on the fact that even when it's an investment, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get your money back. But if income comes in and they feel like they want to get recouped, like, I feel like that's the least I can do. If they want the tax deduction instead and for it to be a grant, it makes my life easier, and I'm all too happy. But part of the reason it makes my life easier is oftentimes the investors only want a certain amount of investment money in. If that was taken off the table, I'd probably be pretty inclined to just say, I'm happy to give everyone their money back at the same time.
So actually, let's just take a second to unpack that. So you just referenced the fact that there's sort of a limit to how much equity or investment a film can take on. So just parse that for me. And Yael, feel free to jump in too on that. But why can't you take the 100% of your budget is investment?
Sometimes you can. There's a lot of films where there's not.
You always can. You may choose not to, but.
Well, oftentimes a investment funder will say there needs to be an investment cap. So they may say, we need to feel pretty good that we can get our $300,000 back with a 20% premium on top of it. And if you have $1 million in equity or an investment,
We'll explain that one.
We'll explain that later. That seems very unlikely that we'll do that. So we're happy for you to have a $1 million budget. If $700,000 of that is donations, that doesn't really affect our recoupment. But we're not happy to give that same $300,000 if we're alongside $700,000 that needs to come in, because then if only $300,000 comes in, they get half their money back instead of all of it.
Right. Okay. We're playing with a limited bucket. But so Yael, what are some of the things you try to think about beyond trying to satisfy the relationship with your funders? Are there calculations you do internally about whether, what are you giving up in a project to get that investment or a grant? Like, how does that calculus work?
I mean, I think we're always feeling like we have to be very nimble. When we started our company, we were doing mostly fiction films. Now we do almost entirely documentary films. And a lot of the fiction practices actually have come into documentaries, which makes it interesting for us. But I think we're always chasing money. It's not like we have tons of offers and we're trying to figure out, oh, well, this one's better than that one. We're often just trying to cobble it all together to get the film finished for a festival or for distribution. And so I think the important thing is to balance it in such a way that it makes sense for everyone and makes sense for the project, not taking on too much equity so that investors will be unhappy because they're unlikely to get their money back unless they understand that that's the risk they're taking. Trying to bring in grants, I think getting grant money is always great, not only because it's money you don't have to repay, but in order to get a grant, you have to kind of go through the process of presenting your project in a certain way, and it's a really good way to understand your project and have to present it early and convince people that it's worthy of coming in. It has a certain prestige to it. So every loop you go through, or every hoop you go through to try and get funding, I think you learn more about your project and you learn how it's going to be valuable and to whom.
And so are you considering, the marketplace for the film as you're thinking about it? Like, what's the distribution potential? What's the
Sure.
sales potential?
Always thinking about that, but most of the films we deal with are passion projects in one way or another. I'd love to be in a position of somebody offering 100% private financing and saying, I don't know, I'm going to think about it. I think if somebody came to us with that, we would do it, assuming that it's not just a vanity project that has no worth in the world. But usually we're bringing together funds from different places. And really, I think on the investor side, I think the most important thing is really working with people who understand what they're getting into, the risk that they're taking, and who are not going to be disappointed at the end by what they get. I think examples are really useful. And extreme examples are almost the most useful. So we did one film that was that had a lot of investment money in it. And it started as one film and became another film, and people came into it for one reason. It became a very different film. It went on to win an Oscar, but the early investors were incredibly unhappy about the film. You think that, winning an Oscar would be great. They were very unhappy. Investors, they did not invest in other films. So that's the kind of thing we couldn't have anticipated, but it was a lesson.
Yeah. Well, so now that was a good pivot. So to our investors on the panel.
Can I just throw in one more thing? Because
Yeah.
there's two different kinds of marketplaces that
Yeah.
made me think of. There's actually getting the film out into the theatrical distribution marketplace, which is good to be realistic about how much money could your film make. The other thing in evaluating grants versus investment is if you don't have a social issue-y kind of doc, how many grants can you actually expect to get? And to me, that's probably much more of the calculation I'm making when I'm trying to look at things. If you have something that hits on whatever the social issue is of the day, there's maybe 50 grants that you can apply for and have a realistic chance. If you're making, I made the only doc I've ever done that was 100% equity. It was a doc about David Byrne and Color Guard, and no grant mission really, I think it's a social issue doc in its own way, but it really doesn't fit grantors' missions. And so being realistic, I had to put together a financing plan that allowed for that.
So to our investors, and Jenny and Katie, I hope you'll weigh in, is how do you guys decide whether a project is the right fit for an investment, and what are the factors that, what's the calculus you're doing?
Well, since I tend to go in multiple different ways, I oftentimes just have a conversation with the filmmaker specifically, and I tend to say, look, I can do a really small grant. I can do a larger investment or loan based on what that specific project needs. And I've had some say, let me get back to you. And I'm like, okay. And then they come back way later and they're like, I'll take that grant. If they need it fast, it's usually they're going to take the larger amount in a loan or an investment, depending on how you want to put it. My experience, though, is that if I'm coming in with an investment, my concern is less about capping the capping the recoupable, and more about the other financiers that are going to be in it with me, because I find that the major issues for me in funding any film are usually not issues that I have with the producers or the directors, but it's issues that I have with other financiers.
Can you just give us a sense? What are the concerns?
If they're
that-
not aligned with the same reasons for putting money into something, when I put money, so my husband and I own a video game company, and when people talk to me about putting money into films, I say, well, look, if you're trying to make money, I have a video game company that you can put some money into, because that'll make you money. But if you're trying to make a difference, if you're trying to have an effect, if you're trying to be the thing that you want to see in the world, then documentary film's absolutely for you. But you have to go into it realizing that your recoupment is not going to just be financial. It's going to be a mix of a bunch of different things. And I think part of having people come in, seeing some of these docs, a lot of which Impact has been a part of, that have actually made money, I think that, of course, brings industry, agencies, production companies that see a new option to come in and maybe make some money. Part of the problem there is that comes with an infrastructure in order to manage all of those different things, which if someone is a young producer and they don't have the experience that some of the people on this stage have, they might say yes to things that are usurious. And I think, I know you guys aren't here to pitch Documentary Producers Alliance, but I will say that what I've seen so far of what DPA is doing, it really is going to be helpful for those young producers coming in to know how to handle that. I now ask more questions of a producer about where they're getting the rest of their money than I do about anything else, because I want to know who I'm going to be in that situation with.
All right, go ahead, Karen.
That was so apt. I realized I'm going to say something that I haven't said to them. So I'm now thinking, I'm feeling really guilty, like I should have mentioned this a long time ago. I have worked in documentary films since the early 90s, and mostly I work on the creative side of things. Fair use. Whoops, how do I do it?
Just pull it to your face.
Oh, I put it here. Can you hear me now? I could use my courtroom voice, but all right. Good. So I come to all this investment stuff much more recently. I do not spend my life writing deals the way there are some lawyers who only seem to do that. But one of the interesting things about financing is that you may have heard about what they call sometimes blue sky laws. The government over the years has done things to protect naive people from losing their shirts by putting money in with snake salesmen and snake oil salesmen and losing their homes and all the rest. So there are requirements in this country that if you want people to invest in something like IBM, you want to do an offering of shares in IBM or anything, you have to comply with federal laws, various state laws. They require that you publish all kinds of information about your project, tell everything practically, how often you change your underwear. Then you have to make sure that they're sophisticated, and you have to file in the different states.
Which means finding out how much money they have.
Right.
Like finding a sophisticated investor means that you can't just take money because somebody says, I really want to do this, because that might be their pension, right?
Right.
Like you have to make sure that they can afford to lose that money.
So the description that was being given of a film that turned out not being what everybody wanted it to be, the horrible thing is that you can be sued by an investor who said, but I thought it was a film about, I thought it was a video game, and you told me it was a video game, and now it's turned out to be a do-good film about crippled children in Arizona, and that's why I've lost all my money, and they can sue, and it's very bad. So one of the curious things is that there is an exception in New York State, at least, for, of all things, Broadway plays. And they do have a sort of fast-track way that you can do much more limited paperwork if you want investors in a Broadway play. It's really great, makes it a lot easier. But you know, it doesn't exist for films. And so one of the things I've wondered about over the years was, how are all these people going out there when the feds notice this and come swooping down on filmmakers for having misrepresented this, that, or the other, or taken money from widows and orphans and all the rest of it. So there is, in practice, and you guys as investors will correct me, but what I learned in representing, because I'm always representing the filmmaker, is that there's a little industry sort of among film lawyers who have kind of adapted a short form where someone signs a letter where they claim they tick all these boxes about how sophisticated they are and so on and so forth. But it's still, I think it could be a little dicey. But even if it's not, and even if all of that is okay, the problems that you can have are when the kinds of ways they want to control what you're doing, the fact that you can't just be expansive and say, oh, I'm making this really great film. You have to realize that everything you say, someone could be grabbing at later, and they have to have all this paperwork, and you're going to spend money on these lawyers to write this paperwork and negotiate with all these different people who are coming, as you so well said. Some of them do care about what you're doing. And in fact, I always say, why don't you ask them if they would just make a donation and get their money back now in a tax deduction? And then you don't have to account to them and pay an accountant to send out monthly payments and this and that.
But we are
right?
finding there's lots of money that's moving in away from the granting space and into the investment space. So let me turn to
go ahead.
Jenny and actually. So Impact Partners, I think, has tried to deal with some of these issues of like, how do you educate investors so that they comply with these problems?
And to bring it more broadly from Impact Partners, which is a very particular structure and particular company, I think the message, whether it's from a lawyer, producer, or investor's point of view, is that when you're going into a deal with somebody, doing your homework and spending time with someone and really understanding their motivations and what they expect to get out of it is like the very first thing you have to do. And even though you can feel desperate as a filmmaker, you need the funding, it's not worth it if you end up in a situation that either side is not happy with in the end. And, from Impact Partners' point of view, I would say it's interesting to hear about the co-financing partners as being a concern. And I think for us, I'm sure that's true as well, but certainly knowing and understanding who the filmmakers are and what they want to do and spending the time to have those conversations and then ultimately feeling that we're investing in that team and not necessarily, the project may change, it's documentary film, who knows, and having a sense of both the scope of where the film could go creatively and also what the goals are in terms of distribution, because you have to know what someone wants to do with a film to understand what the potential is in terms of exploiting it in the marketplace. And there may be films that have some commercial potential, but the filmmakers are committed to airing it on PBS because they want to reach the broadest audience or having an education campaign. And that's fine, and that an investment can still work with that, but you need to have all the information on the table so that you know that your goals are aligned, basically,
But
from the
talk a
beginning.
little, because I think the alignment of goals is something we're going to keep talking about. But there's numbers here, right? We are talking about,
yeah.
right. So I think, could you drill down a little bit
How we
on,
decide?
how you decide when a film is appropriate or where there's a limit to the
Right.
investment?
Well, two things I have to say. One is it's like an art, not a science, and it's just, in our case, just because we're doing 10 to 15 films a year, having a sense of where the marketplace is, what distributors are interested in, having relationships with agents who we can bounce things off of.
And when you say where the marketplace is, kind of what films are selling for?
What films are
roughly?
selling for, what kinds of content different distributors are interested in. You're also guessing about something that may come out 2 or 3 years down the road, and everything may have changed. So there's all the levels of risk and really kind of guesswork that's involved, but educated guesswork based on experience. And then for Impact Partners, because we support social issue films, it's finding a balance for every project we do between those kind of dual bottom line goals. And for some projects, we may be willing to take more risk, and knowing that we may lose money as long as we're representing that to our investors so that they understand because we have a choice model within our organization. So every individual who's going to put in money should be given the information and be able to make a decision, well, here are all the reasons why this is a great project. It may not be the most commercial project, and you may not get all your money back on this one, versus we see this as a very potentially commercial film. So how you come up with that number is a combination of kind of practical analysis about what it could do and what you want to achieve by investing in it.
Right.
And I think every investor probably has a balance, and some of the uncomfortable experiences people may have with investors come from when they're, as Katie was saying, these unrealistic expectations of what you can do when you invest in documentary film. Because, and filmmakers also need to be upfront and not be giving, comps and things for things that are just ridiculous.
Comparisons,
then you're
like
just
marketplace. This film sold for this
comps.
much money.
Yeah,
You're
therefore
comparing
my
it to a
film
big
will
fiction
too.
film
Yeah.
that made a lot of money because it was on a similar topic or something like that. You need to do your research and be very honest with the investors of what your goals are and what you think it could do.
And I will say that for me, the producer is the key when it comes to investment. Like, I love a good director, and a good vision, but when it comes down to it, I'm counting, it's my relationship with the producer, and it's the producer. Do I trust that producer is going to do all the research? I tend to be way more on the ground involved with the producer if I don't feel like they're seasoned and kind of know what they're doing, right? And that's fine with me. I just need to know that going into the project. Like, am I going to need to be on these calls with the sales agents for you because strategically that's just not your strong suit? Or am I going to need to be looking at all the contracts because you're really hot to make this and you may sign something that puts you in a long-term bad position because you're so ready for that? I think that the producer, I think for me, one of the signs that a producer is one of those people is when they're very honest about what they don't know. They're very upfront about, look, this is where I'm good, and these are the places that I have to phone a friend, so to speak. And one of those things is, I think it's very honest to say to any potential investor, right as of right now, if I was selling the film that we're making right now, this is what I think would happen, but I can't promise anything. But it's about really investing in the team, not what you think the film will be, because we all know that with documentary, what you start with can be so far away from what you end up with, and it's dangerous to tell someone, with impact and myself as well, social impact kind of documentaries are really where I want to put my money, but I also understand that sometimes that is not going to have the same social impact on the outside as it was in the research phase. So you have to find people who are flexible.
And just to say, to try to define certain terms, some of you may know, but double bottom line means people are investing with two goals. One is potentially to have a financial recoupment, but also perhaps to have a social recoupment, that there's something about that social issue that feels important to that investor. And so if they didn't make all of their money back, they're kind of doing their other purpose in the world. But in terms of phone a friend, so Karen, I actually do want to turn to you. There are a few key philosophical and legal contractual things where you could give away too much as a filmmaker. Could you just quickly, sort of briefly outline for us what those may be and why we keep dancing back from the word equity? Because I think that has a particular definition.
You may have to prompt me on a little of this. The problem, I think, really goes back to what Jenny is saying, which is that it's a little bit like when you go to a bar and you're single, and you start talking to somebody, and they're nice, and you start talking, and pretty soon you're kind of seeing the rest of the evening, and you're finishing their sentences in your head, and it all seems so great. But, if you hang out with them for 3 weeks, suddenly you realize, they keep interrupting you, they're not paying attention, they're really dumb, they're not this, they're not that. Okay, so that's the same way when we're trying to sell something, or indeed in negotiations, when you're set on, oh God, they've got $50,000, I really need that. You don't even hear how much you're editing what you're saying about your project. And that's dangerous, because at the end of the day, one of the things is that with investors, they do want to have they want controls. So suddenly they're saying something like, well, the budget has to stay here. I've almost never had a filmmaker come in on the budget that they first started off with, and they don't know what things are going to happen, and the project morphs, like we're all saying. Suddenly your subject has something huge happen in their lives that completely takes you on another track, whatever.
Well, but
So-
before we even get to those points, right,
Okay.
there's some legal ones, like
Okay,
about
so
ownership.
but the legal thing is that if they put those limitations, or they say, for example, you can't raise the budget unless I say it's okay. That is this balance of how much control you have in your project. And or they have to finally approve it. Like that happens. If you go and sell your film to a broadcaster, they're going to have to say, well, we have to like it. And if we don't like it, you're in breach. You accept that when you get that kind of deal. But when you're in the very early thing and you've been working on your film for 3 years and now you're getting this investment and you're invested in it emotionally and monetarily and every which way, you're looking now at various things that you have to hear what they're saying, and you have to confront what you're trying to say to them. So when they say, there are some people, like impact partners, who don't want to have a hand in your pocket for the rest of your life. They want to put their money in. I think I'm right. No, Jenny? Am I right?
hope so.
Sometimes
Depends
right.
how much money the film's going to make.
How much?
No, we have a piece of net profits, so it does continue. It's just proportional based on.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I remember a deal where I thought you didn't, but that was okay. There are people who will give money and want their money back with a premium, and then they go away. There are others who say, I want my money back and a premium, and I want it up front, and then I want to continue to get over the years. And you have to think about that, because that means a continuing responsibility going on. But there are other things that come into it, which is what you want me to really point out. Whether they have a voice, who has editorial control, who owns the copyright. There are investors who say, well, I put in $50,000 and I want to have some piece of the copyright. That has implications that most lay people don't even begin to understand. There are all kinds of rights that co-owners of a copyright have granted under the copyright statute. And unless you address them differently in a contract that you make, they will govern. It means that your outtakes may suddenly be available to an investor to do things with, theoretically at least. Or that they have a right in, if you did a follow-up film on that subject. So you have to look at that issue and understand what it is they want, what you're willing to give, what you're not willing to give. And I guess what was the other thing you cared
Right,
about?
so co-ownership, editorial control, business decision approval,
Okay, and
those are
business
all the
decision
things.
control. So I've been in this situation for just recently, a difficult situation, where the filmmaker has spent 4 or 5 years on this documentary, and does need money, and the investor is kind of a do-good investor, except that the filmmaker is being asked to give up a lot of decision-making. And that's, you may decide, I really need that money. I don't care. I'll think of them as if they were HBO and that they would have a voice in how good what I do or what I don't do. But it's like meeting them in the bar, because they're putting on their best face and you're putting on your best face. And 6 months later, when you say, look, guys, I really need to make this additional trip to Tahiti to finish filming the such and such. And they say, not with no, you're not, because that'll cut it. Or you can do that, but you will have to cover it out of your net receipts on this film.
Okay,
right?
so that's a good segue. And just to
Segue.
say, I think part of why we've been steering away from the use of the word equity is our understanding is legally and it's part of that conferring of ownership. And so we've been choosing as DPA to start calling it investment financing, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're giving up rights to your own intellectual property. Okay, but so that question of there's a tension, and I think, yeah, Ellen, Josh, you can speak to this, which is you've taken money, there's a cap on how much money you can take, there's the realities of budgets, how big, how small, and there's a sticky wicket in terms of filmmakers trying to earn sustainable livings, and I'm using filmmakers interchangeably, directors and producers. And so when we kind of get into a situation where there's a tension, I wonder if you guys could talk to me about what that tension feels like on the filmmaking side. What do I mean by tension?
I mean, I think tension is, I mean, you started saying, like, I think very often the budget, just because you say when you first go out with a project, I want X amount of dollars, doesn't mean you can raise X amount of dollars. Like you said, most contracts you've seen probably don't end up reaching their fundraising goals, or they go over. But one way or another, there's something off from the intentions at the beginning of a documentary project and the end. Oftentimes, the roundest number that's least specific, that an investor who's all of a sudden their investment is at risk because some part of your equation has changed. The easiest thing oftentimes to cut is a round number that goes to the director or producer, because it's round,
So vague,
vague, and you're in direct conversation. And it's a lot easier than saying, well, maybe you can, be staying in cheaper hotels, or I know why you don't need this filming trip, or maybe we can cut a week of editorial, yada yada. And so
Somehow
it's
the filmmaking is more precious than the filmmaker in certain
Right.
moments. So
and it's also just like you can give that note in 30 seconds, and actually deep diving into how to solve really complex budget discrepancies is hard, bordering on impossible sometimes, depending on what you have. And so oftentimes, and usually producers, directors are the people who've been working on the film for, upwards of 3 years. Sometimes, I have a film where, I have someone who's working on the film we're finishing right now who's been working on it for 8 years. And those are the people who also care the most about getting the film done and want to put the film first, but they're also the people spending years of their life, and all of a sudden, that 8 years of work and those fees usually, it's almost never reflecting 8 years of a living wage to begin with. And so all of a sudden, I'm just going to throw out random numbers, but it's not uncommon for someone to work on something for 8 years and for someone to say, well, yeah, you have $50,000 in the budget to direct this movie, but if we need $10,000 for, maybe that can go down to 40. And oftentimes that will actually be the director or the producer offering that as the solution.
stop doing that.
But it's really complicated because
Yeah.
you need to get your film done and
Because
everything.
if you don't finish your film, you got nothing.
Right.
Right. It's like, so we're a little held hostage. I mean, Yael, do you find that you similarly,
Yeah, I think it's really hard. You're desperate to finish your film, and you want to do that one last trip to wherever because you think it's going to be so important for the film. Nobody wants to finance it. You decide to pay for it yourself. I really like that Katie talks. It's very rare to hear anybody talk about really liking the producers. The filmmakers usually are the ones that people put first. But one of the things I really liked in some of the contracts in fiction films was that there is always this tension of the director wants something and the financiers want something. And I always thought, if you're a good producer, you tread that line you should be treading that line and looking out for the best interest of the film, but also the best interests of the financiers. And there used to be contracts in fiction which said, in a case of disagreement, because you're going over budget, the producers will decide, not the directors, because the directors have the most, they're the least, often they're in a place where they can't make the best
I have that
long-term
in
decision.
a current fiction contract right now.
And
We made an executive producer that is a producer in all but name, the deciding
decide.
person.
And I always think that's it's a sign of a team that trusts each other, so I think it's really good for a team also. But I want to be in that position where, I'm either on the director side, having a producer who goes out and goes to bat for me, or comes to me and says, that trip to Haiti that you think you need, I think there's enough, and I don't think it warrants the extra $15,000, so I don't think we should do it. If you still feel so, tell me again why it's so important. But those are the conversations that I think good teams should have, and that can really benefit both sides. So thank you, Katie.
Yeah, and so I think, this panel, I think, was curated intentionally for this kind of relationship, but I think, so the filmmakers are often feeling that they're sort of alone holding the bag on these creative choices that then have financial repercussions. And I'm curious what you guys feel as investors, you've already, let's assume you've stepped into the project, or you're very seriously considering it. I'm wondering how you feel about the responsibility of living wages for the team, and how do you square that when these are sticky wickets? They're not easy choices.
Well, I'll say for me, it's crucially important. Like I continue to look at, because I've been doing this for a few years, but I continue to look at these situations, and when I see somebody who I know has been working on a story for 4 years, and then they've budgeted themselves for 50 grand, I'm like, okay, I get what you're trying to do there, but we all know how often documentaries make over the investment and premium and non-recoupable.
We don't know.
like
that.
not very
like
often.
not.
Not very often. Okay.
Almost never.
I mean, sorry guys, wrong industry. No, I mean, I think that for me, I want the filmmakers that I think are doing good work to continue to do good work, and I would love to see, a way to quantify those years of work, even if it's like descending amounts. I also know that when you're very first doing research, you're not saving every receipt from every conversation that you have. And sometimes people need to see that too, to be able to give back money to the producers that they've spent, which I know that you guys are working on making sure that that's part of people's work. But I would love to see producers be able to quantify this amount of money per year they were working on the project. That's not, even if they did it in an equity, that was part of an equity investment, that they then got more points from half of the equity pool, the
Meaning
investor
if-
half, that would be
meaning-
fine too.
Meaning a filmmaker
What I
can
suggested,
can a filmmaker can translate. Well, we're not doing.
being creative.
Yeah,
Being
sorry.
creative. We're trying not to. We haven't come to terms with what we are suggesting yet.
Right.
But part of
Well,
the
that's what I would
ideas are
like for
translating
people to
your
do.
sweat equity into equity. But go ahead,
Yeah, 'cause
Josh.
it's not
What were
fair.
you?
No, I just think what Katie's saying is like incredible, and I think it's like across the board. I find it's hard for people to fully advocate for themselves oftentimes in these situations, like especially if you're new to investment. But almost all documentaries are somewhat desperate for money, and it's hard to, when you're demanding something for the film and you're oftentimes trying to make that the priority, it's really hard to say also like make sure I'm the priority,
Right,
or
I
like
can
I said
eat,
this was
yeah.
going to be one thing and this whole thing is being done on my word, and so I can ask for more money for the film because this is going to take an extra year, but can I ask for more money for me because this is going to take an extra year? And I think I work in the fiction side of the industry as well, and one of the reasons I oftentimes prefer the documentary side of the industry is because of this double bottom line thing. And I think there's a real opportunity for negotiations between investors and producers to not be like we're battling each other and who wins and who loses, which is, I guess, in our country in general is the general mode, but instead for it to be like, let's create something that actually matches our philosophy. And I think there's enough flexibility in this industry for that to be done. And I think there's it's an exciting opportunity for double bottom line producers to become triple bottom line investors, and the third bottom line be like have the philosophy of how your film is getting made and the financials of how your film's getting made and the sustainability of your partners actually reflect
The
your
ethos
what
of
you believe in as a
social
person, why you have
justice.
a double bottom line and you're not just investing in oil. And I think it's always like a funny thing. It's the classic thing with like labor unions is labor unions have the worst worst health insurance and the worst hours for the people who are going and knocking on doors. But I think there's probably a lot of investors in our industry who would make an argument, like make a documentary about unfair labor practices,
Right.
and then be very happy to look the other way and have their director get paid, when you do the math, like less than $1 an hour over the
Right.
course of the film.
And
so
really,
like, how do
we've
we
done some of
correct
that math, and it can once you put in the research and development, the production years, and then the distribution and outreach years, it's getting
I
pretty
think
low. So I
sharing
wonder-
that math with investors is important though too, because
so.
I
I think
don't
as
think that
specific as
investors
possible.
know I ask a lot of questions, but I don't think most investors realize how little per hour they're paying, that they're allotting for that in the budget. And I think a lot of people I know from Impact Partners, they would prefer to make sure that people are getting paid. So I think it's worth having that conversation.
Well, so, but
And a
there's a
lot of
tension.
this-
So let's just throw down a couple of numbers, right? What is the reasonable expectation on the investor side of how much money would you expect to see, a percentage of the budget, let's say, that should be part of the
Well, I
above the
really do
line?
think it's very specific to a project, because there are projects that somebody's been working on it for 8 years, and there are projects where somebody's come in 2 months ago and they're going to wrap it up in 4 months. So I think on average, people say about 10% of the budget should be for the producer and 10% should be for the director. But I really think should be more of a guide than a handcuff, and I think just echoing what Katie said and what Josh said too, being as specific as you can when you're having these conversations about why a certain line item is what it is, whether it's a salary or anything else, creative on the film, and hopefully having partners that you can engage on that level of conversation with when you're at that stage, either at the time that a decision is being made of whether or not an investment will happen, or if there's overages and you're having a conversation about how you deal with that. But
So it wouldn't scare you away.
A collaboration is going to be much more inviting to try to solve the problem than a feeling of like assumed negativity. If you're solving a problem together, it's most likely going to be more productive than if it's presented. First of all, like a problem comes up and it's presented way after the fact, because you don't want to understandably freak out your funder.
Right.
Or investor, but I think most investors will actually really appreciate having been brought into all these, whether challenges that came before or challenges that come up during, and then solving it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think all this stuff is super tricky, and I mean, like the 10% thing, I think is like a good like baseline in a lot of ways. Except that there's a ironic thing I've been thinking about recently, which is like the smaller the film, probably the higher percentage of the work that's on the like
Well,
directors.
that's what I was going to say, is
producers'
that
back.
I expect in a smaller budget film to see a higher percentage. And if it's a $4 million budget and that the same level of work is being put into a much smaller budget, there's no reason that should be the same either. So yeah, I totally agree.
And just to, finish my kind of rambling thought earlier, or my union tirade, I do think there's a real power in an investor in their agreements dictating a certain amount of like, this is what I want if I'm going to give you this money, like I demand that you pay yourself from this money, like the 10% of my money goes towards your salary.
Right.
Like something like that says like, I actually care and this is a standard.
Right. I think there's a perception, particularly when filmmakers are hungry and they need the money, that anything they say is going to rock the boat.
Right.
And I think you guys know that when they come to you, that there's like, I really need this money, and what am I going to say that's going to make them say yes? And so we potentially are not advocating for ourselves in that moment. And can we mutually shoulder the responsibility of making sure the field is sustainable?
Well, the
And also-
guidelines are
But I
so
think
important.
just to, obviously Katie is an incredibly friendly investor, and you are going to have opportunities out there. You are.
Yeah.
And that where you might actually want to take advantage of someone who actually is hoping to get their money back, and all of the kind of realities of the marketplace are more of but doesn't mean that you can't necessarily have an open conversation with that person, because ultimately you might decide you actually shouldn't work with that person. So by having had that conversation, you will arrive at that conclusion. So either way, you win. You really shouldn't be partnering with somebody who you're going to end up in a legal battle with or something like that, ideally. So
Could I throw something in here? When I talk with my clients, no matter what the subject is, one of the things I've sort of learned over the years and tried to teach them is that you are what you project. You become what you project. If you project this sort of need, your project and sort of lack of self-regard almost, that's going to change very much what happens in your negotiation. You have two really lovely investors up here, and they're not all like that. So you need to know, and you need to know what you're willing to give up, and you need to stand tall, because you're not just bringing, sometimes you're bringing access that nobody else in the world has, because you have the relationship with this subject, they've signed with you, they're going with you, and if they want the story, they're going to have to go through you. But other times, it's just that you're making a damn good film, and you've been working on it and pulling it together, and you're bringing this thing, you're bringing talent, you're bringing, all this stuff. That has worth. And if you just sort of, I really need the money, compared to, I have this great film, and I think it's going to do this and that, and I'm looking for some investment to help me fill out the picture. You project something more self-assured, more believing in yourself, and those things that you bring are like equity, as we've been saying up here. But I am often in the position of a producer. I'm talking for my filmmaker to these people who have no heart. Sorry, there are some investors who have no heart. And what it is they are all coming from the Hollywood frame of mind. You'll find a lot of these people who write investment deals, they're in Hollywood. And you'll find a lot of agents who are big on it because their space has closed up, but their overhead is still very high. And they've decided that maybe this will be like a Michael Moore. It'll be an inconvenient truth, and they'll make a lot of money. And they really don't know how to think out of the box. So they start talking investment to you right away. They start going out there and doing those deals. And sometimes they don't just have 1 or 2 or 3, they have 50 investors who are all putting in some small amount, and you've got to keep them all happy, and they all have these requirements. So the bottom line with all this is that you have to be clear-eyed, whether it's a lawyer you trust, or a producer you can team with, or your roommate. You need somebody who keeps you focused, because one of the most dangerous things is to get into that negotiation mode and then find that you wake up in the middle of the night in a hot sweat and you say, I really, cold sweat, really can't do this. I can't work with those people. Yes, and it's too late because you stop talking other funding possibilities, and if you don't get this money, your ass is grass. So then you go ahead and do it, and we know how the story ends.
So let's talk a little turkey, because there are some immovable constants, right? Like traveling costs what it costs. The airlines don't care. Shoots cost what they cost. Editors cost what they cost. To some extent, and this is open to the panel, and how are each of you trying to come up with, when the budget can't bear more, but the costs go up, or the costs are what they are and you can't raise it all? What are the ways in which you're each struggling with that? Because that's where the rubber meets the road at the end of the day.
I would say if you can find yourself an EP or a mentor that you can call an EP on your film that is savvy enough and has done this enough as a producer or as, in their own right, then you can have some of the benefits of, the very few films that get, say, impact partner support, right? And those people can help you find ways to kind of move around that. One of the things is by doing kind of in-kind donations. A lot of the people who are documentary, at least the ones that are in, the nice lady space that we are apparently saying, they have a lot of Amex points. Like absurd amounts of Amex points on their platinum Amex, right? And so if you have to get somewhere, don't be afraid of talking to them about using some in-kind donation to keep your budget down, right? Because they're already invested. They already want for you to be able to finish this movie. And so them using 200,000 Amex points to get you a motel and flights to El Paso is going to be a benefit to them and a benefit to you. It's not just about being a benefit to them. It's a benefit to you. It's a benefit to them too, because you're keeping that low. So get creative with those people who are willing to do it that way. And I think, sadly, you're right. It's not, there are definitely people who come in and they're like, ooh, a new way that I can try and make money. And
They don't last though.
No, they do
won't
like
make
one,
money.
and then they're like, I'm not going to do that again. But I would say that having somebody that you even if you say, okay, this person knows kind of the space and knows what they're doing, I'm going to ask them to be an EP on my project, even if they're not putting money in, just so that I can get the benefit of some of those things. It's worth it because some of these people, they want to help in all the other ways as well.
And I think it's important to remember that that all these folks and we as filmmakers want these relationships. These are relationships. It's not just transactional.
No.
You give me your money, I give you a film. It's about being in conversation so that they know, oh, I need to go to El Paso and we don't have any more
Because you
money
never
in the
know
budget
what
for
they
flights.
have.
Yeah.
They may be like, I have
a plane.
Yeah, I have a plane. I have, I have a white bowl, that you can use. Like you just have no idea what they have, and they don't even know that would be useful to you. They don't know that unless you tell them that you could be looking for that kind of thing.
But again, I'm all about the rubber and the road here because we have to sign contracts, right? And so budgets, we set our budget, we get agreements, the investors come in, there are budget overages, films change and go longer. So you have to, in these contracts on the front end, prepare for everything you don't know, right? That is the nature of this agreement. And so I'm curious, for each of you, what are some of the tools you're using in the contracting moment that allow you to be more nimble, allow the films to breathe, unpredictably?
I mean, I think that when you're dealing with an investment contract, even for a film, there are lines that have to be drawn about budgets, and obviously there are contingencies. There are ways that producers obviously know about how to account for potential things that can go wrong. And from an impact partner's point of view, I would say it's a bit on the producer. Now, then when something goes wrong beyond that, that's another conversation to have, and whether or not that's contractual is an interesting question. But I think when we look through a budget of a film and are having a conversation with a producer, ideally we would want to see that transparently laid out. And you can't plan for everything that goes wrong. I mean, contractually, you can't say, well, there's an open-ended amount of investment in this film. There are, at least for most investors, I think there would be a point. Maybe not for you, Katie. I'm not sure, but we definitely
I don't have that much money. So yes, there is a point that it can't come from me.
Well, and I'm not even saying if it's coming from the individual investor, but once there's an investment structure in a film, it is different than you're doing it on your own. You're solo. You're sweat equity doing it.
I think it's helpful also to not all budget overages are a bad thing. So, I'm curious, just to use an example of yours that I'm actually curious about, you take a film, Icarus. Yeah. That film started off, and the original idea, probably before you guys were involved, if I had to guess, was...
The original idea was the Super Size Me version of the film. Yeah.
Super Size Me with steroids.
That's what we invested in.
That is what you invested in.
Yeah, so it changed.
So you invest in that. I imagine there was a budget for what that was, which is probably, and a plan and a schedule that I imagine however many months into filming, there's a turn that completely opens up what that movie is.
The Russians are
that
coming.
Budget, yeah, the Russian.
Well,
that budget gets thrown out the window. That's a good problem for everyone.
But this is a perfect example. The original contract did not allow for that possibility.
Right.
So once it happened, we had to reevaluate and make an amendment to our agreement, first of all, and raise more money.
Right.
And figure out how we were going to tackle that problem
together,
because we could never have anticipated that would have happened. So,
and that's probably an extreme example of how much something changes. But in documentary, it probably happens a decent amount that a film is very different than the original concept.
But I
do think this goes to the thing you were saying earlier. As a producer, it's my job to work for the film, not necessarily for the director. I work for the director partially, I work for the investors partially, and more than anything, I should work for the film. And oftentimes that final shoot, it may be a little bit more money, but it's actually the thing, I should be asking myself the question, can this actually make the investor more money because the movie will be good as opposed to be something that's going to go to a festival and not sell? Is that the difference? And I think that's when the conversation gets most complicated, when you go over budget because you were irresponsible with money and didn't have
I was more thinking of this kind of situation, that with the unknown, that could be good or bad, but that has to be dealt with.
But I think it's a good point that you can't. The lesson to take from this is not that you should think about every circumstance that can happen in a film in your contracts, because then you will spend so much on legal fees that you will have to cut some of your producer fees in order to.
You can't think of everything anyway.
And you can't think of everything. So that's, again, another reason why the communication is so important, so that when something goes wrong, you do address it, you do add an amendment to your contract, and everyone agrees this is the new step forward.
And I guess I'm curious I think Icarus is a super interesting example here, but were you guys the only people involved at that point? Like, what would you have done in
Yeah.
that situation had Katie been your co-investor and she said, I hate the idea of raising the budget, and I think we should just make Supersize Me.
Well, that's why Katie was, I think, bringing up the issue of
Right. No,
who
but
are
that's
the
why it's-
partners on
but
the
it-
financing side
It
as well.
protects your investment to have that flexibility as well. So in your
Right.
case, you could just say, we all agree, and we'll just throw out the old contracts and make new ones.
And
But
put
you
in
could
more
be
money.
backed into a corner by a third-party contract.
Especially if your investment is less than that other person's, then you really get
Don't have-
into
right,
like that happens to me. That's happened to me a couple of times where I was the lower amount investor, and so I didn't have the leverage to support the filmmaker the way that I would have wanted to, and then the filmmaker ended up getting screwed because the other investor. But that's why now I'm very careful about who I invest with, right?
But I guess my question is there something to put in a contract that allows for reasonable, so that you don't need to throw it out and start over, but that allows for, in the end, for the film to
be
be
more
protected?
nimble.
We do that contractually. We say we think the budget is going to be a certain amount, but we allow and we say to the investor, we have the freedom to
Raise up
because
to
it's in
some-
our interest not to go over budget on some level also. So we allow ourselves the flexibility to go up by 10%, but beyond that, we would need the investor's approval. But in that
We also
case,
do something similar to that if there's a range of potential, a range of a budget and also potentially a range of how much investment versus grants, if you don't know yet if you're going to be able to raise grants. So those kinds of ranges could be maybe useful.
But on that film that I was talking about before, we did have to go to investors and say, we actually have no more choice now. We either have to change direction on this film or this entire thing falls apart. And we had to get their approval, and they weren't happy about they changed. They weren't happy about the new contracts they had to sign. They were never happy with the film. But we had to go through that process and basically say, we have to either abandon the entire project and you will get nothing, or we have to change now and make the best situation out of what has happened.
And in that situation, could like, let's say you had 5 investors, could any one of them have
Yeah,
basically
they could
had
have
a
said
veto?
no. Yeah.
Had a veto to say, no, you can't take another dollar, so just release the film as is.
The other thing is, could you be vulnerable to some kind of claim? So you have to think about that. But I'd just like to give you an example of something that I don't even know how our investors would feel about this. But there was a situation of a film where, you know, and when you do a Broadway play, if any of you are planning to do that, the normal way that that happens is that they have a budget, they sort of know what things are going to cost. It's much easier because they've got a script, they've got the director, so on and so forth. They figure it all out and they go out to raise the money. And all the money is held until they've raised their budget. And then they say, yes, we're there, and they cash the checks and they make their production.
It's like
Everybody
fiction
earns.
films.
Yeah.
But with a documentary film, you know, it's not like that. Not just that you don't know how it's going to end, if it's going to end the way you scripted it's going to end. It's that you don't have all your money in your pocket when you start. And there are soft things like your own income, and there are hard things that you have to pay right away, but you can move things and shape things and continue to raise money. And there was a filmmaker who had a rather high budget film, well, now maybe not so much high budget, but higher than I've seen, you know, in prior years. And they had a couple of investors, and they were raising investment, but they weren't anywhere near what they needed to make. But they were making the film. They had to make the film. It was on things that were happening, and they had to film. And then they got an offer from a broadcaster. And the broadcasters so believed in the film, they were paying a really nice amount of money for getting this film. But when they went back and looked at their paperwork, which I did not do, it said that these would be revenues. They're described as revenues for the film. They make a sale to the broadcaster. And so the money would first go out to investors. So then they wouldn't have the money to finish the film. It didn't say that they could, because it assumed they would have made up the budget before they made a sale. But that isn't how documentary filmmakers live. I think
Well,
the
you could-
Penny
you could
Bakers,
do pre-sales,
Penny
yeah.
Bakers made pre-sales, you know, all over the place to survive, to
Get
pay
a
for
really
their
good
films.
lawyer.
That's a bad
Would you
contract.
have done?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, I
bad
know. I'm not going to
contract.
name the
You have
lawyer.
to define the budget.
Just don't
So-
go to that
so
lawyer.
often- so
but
often-
the point, we did end up resolving it. And we got those investors to accept that a pre-sale was to make up the budget. But I just had a similar kind of argument over that, where they do have a budget they've agreed, but we have no idea what this film is ultimately going to cost, and they do want to watch every shekel. So the thing becomes, well, if we do need more money to get the film across the line, how are we going to deal with that? And we put in that one, we put in language about working together to make up the shortfall, and that if they could do it, hopefully they don't want to do it with more investment. They want to do it with grants and things like that. And if they can't do that, the last sort of resort would be that the director takes less, but she would get it back in the waterfall before they recovered. So you had, again, and I suggested once, I think, to you guys, that another possibility is that if you run into that kind of thing and you really have to, it's reasonable what you're doing to make the film, and you try to think of somebody who can be that person who says what's reasonable if you disagree, that the filmmaker gets a higher percentage of once the investment has been paid, gets a higher percentage of profits to make up for what they've given up in their money up front or whatever. They may never get to net profits, but maybe they will. And then maybe it should be 65-35 for a year before it goes to 50-50 or whatever the heck it is. But the point that they're all making is a contract can't think of everything. So it just has to have mechanisms to think about what kinds of things can we trip over and how will we deal with them if they arise. Because the worst thing is to be in a straitjacket.
And I think we do want to just give a few of those kinds of examples, and just to explain that your contract should probably say the budget needs to be completed. You want to have a contingency. You want to have room to raise the budget if you need to. I don't think people doing contracts want to keep having to go back to keep doing the contracts over and over again. So, but what are some? So let's say you agree on a project where the budget is high, the producers and directors, the above the line talent says, okay, we're going to try to raise grant money. We can't raise grant money. I do want to talk about some of the knobs you find you can turn. Karen alluded to one of them, or said, can you shift the net profit split? Like, someone explain what that is and how you can start moving levers to make up for the shortfalls when you can't raise them, or the film changed course and you went over. There are other ways than just an investor, may I please have some more? There's got to be other tools.
I mean, deferred fees, again, no, they're bad for everyone.
But if you defer them, then what?
Then when do you get them in the waterfall?
I would say that
the
you get them
waterfall,
first,
right? How all the money
because the
goes
film wouldn't have got, like, if I'm producing a film and the film gets delivered and I didn't get paid my full fee, it also probably means that especially if it's because we didn't raise our full budget, the investor had the expectation that the budget was going to be a certain amount. That should get paid back first.
Before people.
But I think one of the DPA recommendations that I like the most is the idea that because it takes so much work to raise grant money, is that filmmakers in the money that is returned, if there are profits that are made, filmmakers will be compensated for the sweat equity that went into raising grant money. I think it's something that's becoming more common in terms of contracts, and I think it's a really good way to compensate filmmakers and make up for some of the shortfall.
And just to explain quickly, so a waterfall that we're referring to is when money is taken as an investment, what's the expectation of the order money is going to be paid back? And there's the first tier, which is recouping the original investment. But when does that happen if filmmakers have deferred their fees or if the budget hasn't been completed? So at what phase do things get paid out? From recouping the original investment to getting a premium, some additional percentage on top of that for the risk of investing in a project, and then there's this net profit split. If the film makes money, how do all of these people who are sharing in the financial burden of the film get their money out, and in what percentages? And so I think what everyone's saying is that there's ways to keep, sort of tweaking. It's not all, this is the deal. You put in this much money and this is how much you get out. This is where there's room for negotiation, and you need lawyers and phone-a-friends and producers and investors who understand that each of these things is a different way of trying to, balance the scales a little bit. And also, I think, because I am a filmmaker, the wish that we also can participate in the profitability of our films if they are so fortunate as to be one of the few that crosses that threshold. And so I think we did kind of stack the deck with folks who believe that too, right? That that profitability.
And just to define the terms
Yeah.
for if the way it generally works for most film investment is that if your budget was entirely funded by investment, then the investors are to receive 50% of the net profits, and the filmmakers are to receive 50% of the net profits. So I think what Yael was referring to is that if it doesn't end up being entirely investment, and there's a portion that is deferred or sweat equity or grants or other things that are, then that percentage of the net profits should go toward the filmmaker. So if an investor only put in 25% of the budget and the filmmaker is really primarily responsible for raising that other 75%, then they'll see a higher percentage of the, I guess that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's basic. I mean, the really simple math equation for that is just investors, their investment amount divided by the total budget of the film divided by
Yes.
2 is what their net profits is in the end. And
Sometimes people ask for more than that because I think in fiction, although I haven't worked in fiction, there's not a lot of understanding about how grants would work. So if there's an investor coming from the fiction space,
Right.
They expect
may not
all of
understand
That's
it,
right.
right.
They expect all of it.
And I will say there's one place where I think that gets funny, and that's purely like I had a documentary that I invested in, but I also, after I put the investment in, I went out and raised almost $200,000 in grants for that same film. And so where that falls, I don't know, right? Because like they wouldn't have gotten that money. I mean, I took care of all of it. I made sure they got with the fiscal, so how does that end up working? Don't expect that from people, by the way.
So guys, before we
They'll
keep
want
going,
10%.
I actually think I really went over budget on my time, and so we're not necessarily going to have time. Are we out of time for questions too? Well, so let me just say this. There's the DPA, the Doc Producers Alliance folks in the audience, please stand up so that if folks have questions after that we can't answer, there's a number of us here, and these guidelines will be forthcoming in 2020. So we'll take one question from the audience, and then we'll sick them on you guys. Okay, so one question? Gentleman here.
Hi, how are you? We would all love for this to continue, but while you were speaking, I saw a lot of people sort of nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that's me. And for those of us who spent 5 years on a documentary and put, sweat equity and all kinds of stuff, I have a couple of just questions to clarify a few points you made, and I have just one. One is, for example, how do you calculate, let's say you're doing a documentary on Antarctica, which is a seasonal work or something like that, okay? Is that a different formula? Also, you spoke of a documentary where there was a lot of friction internally but won the Oscar. Are you at liberty to say which one? And thirdly, just to clear up the point, it's not 200,000 miles for that hotel room, it's 100. Yeah, just joking. Depends. For those of us who have to do that kind of stuff.
I had expensive filmmakers, maybe.
So the question is, how much can budgets absorb sort of the differences that each film requires? This sort of seasonal question, does it change the equation?
Yeah, I mean, I worked on a film as a producer that was shot actually in Antarctica and in the Sahara and in 2 other deserts. The filmmaker wasn't charging for her time between the shoots because there was a long period of time between them. Also in the editing, she couldn't, she was also editing the film, but it took a while to raise the money. She wasn't covering herself for the time where there was a gap. So I think if something's seasonal, you have to be budgeting around that and doing other work at the same time, which is, in general, I think the best way to be a filmmaker anyway, as much as you can, so that you're getting experience on other things while you're doing docs. And that's both the real blessing and the difficulty of docs, is that they're hard to predict, and there isn't a finite block where you're going to be done. In fiction, your prep days, your prep weeks, your production time, your post, and then you're done. And in nonfiction, it can just go for forever. TV's a little different, and I think as we all get into streaming and into television deals, we're being forced to deal with budgets and schedules that have greater limitations on them. I always think that's a good thing for a lot of projects, but not all of them.